Hey Collective, it's Al, and I'm coming to you with another video that will be accompanying a piece I'm releasing on LinkedIn tomorrow morning surrounding the topic of the pursuit of perfectionism and kind of the mental trap that can lead us into as human beings. And what the piece really explored was kind of the more analytical side of it and kind of making the point that when you strive for perfectionism, you sometimes neglect life's lessons in the pursuit of trying to avoid them. And the main thing that I was trying to focus on was it is your mistakes that you make today that sometimes will lead to the greatest victories tomorrow. And it has something to do with the fact that if you live your life trying to be perfect all the time, you box yourself into a state that you can't really sustain for very long, and it can actually trip you up down the road. Because you might end up at the end of your life and you kind of wonder, well, what actually did I learn? I was so busy trying to be perfect for everyone else that I really didn't experience life. I was so busy trying to be the director of everything, when in truth, I'm actually more like the actor that's being directed, and that I needed to kind of ground my energy. But I missed that because I was striving so hard to be perfect, or I was so concerned about public persona and the opinions of others, that I neglected to do the coursework that was handed to me, which was related to my shadow, which is what usually trips us up and makes mistakes in the first place, right? A mistake is just your shadow, in my opinion, kind of nudging you in a subconscious way that trips you up in a conscious state to make a mistake so as to pull your attention to what it is that you're doing. And one of the things about truly spiritual people and conscious leaders and all of you that are probably watching this is you realize that most of the glory comes in why you do the things that you do and kind of understanding it in a way that psychologists would be really happy that you were working on yourself, right? Like that's kind of the concept behind psychology and spirituality as a whole, is trying to understand why we as human beings do certain things. And when we strive for perfection, the point was you tend to neglect that and kind of try to expedite the process under either a misguided belief or in a sense of urgency because you always feel like you're running out of time. And so you try to avoid every type of possible mistake and then kind of box yourself to the point where you can't breathe anymore. And so what ends up happening is that you kind of end up in a situation like I've been in times where I make a mistake and I'm so busy trying to live up to someone else's ideal of who I should be as a spiritual person or as a conscious leader or as a content creator, that you sometimes are more concerned about what their perception is of you as opposed to what you actually feel or what you've agreed to in this life path and what you're here to learn. And so one of the benefits about this conversation that I wanted to bring everyone's attention to that is watching this is that don't dim your light. And what I mean by this is something that happened to me recently, which was in my attempt to live up to someone else's ideal, I ended up dimming myself. And what I meant is I thought I had made a mistake because I was in a public setting and something happened that may have looked bad if someone didn't mean me well, which is how that came about. But in the moment, instead of being triggered and allowing myself to make these type of mistakes, I was able to focus my energy very quickly on what I was actually responding to in the scenario by looking at what the actual mistake was that was being projected onto me. And what I realized is that every time that I've succeeded in my lifetime, it's always been because of situations like those in the past that I have overcome. And one of the benefits about being that person is that when I then see other people do similar things, I have much more compassion and empathy for who they are as a leader looking at someone who may be in crisis or whatnot. Because I'm grounded in that energy and because I know that terrain, I have made those mistakes myself. So in the moment, what I ended up doing was I ended up looking at where the information was coming from and what I was actually being almost triggered by. And what it was is that I have never lied to myself about who I am, and never have I lied to other people. I don't really believe in lying to people because I'm one of those people that's like, if I get up to the gates of heaven, so to speak, I better get there as me because otherwise they're not going to let me in. So, but what ended up happening was that this person did what I call a bank shot attempt at triggering me because they're too passive. We'll go with a polite term. They're too passive to come at me directly. And in the moment, what I realized is that I had never agreed to be a perfect person. So why was I striving to fulfill someone else's ideal of what a spiritual person or as a content creator should be, right? I was kind of almost being triggered by something that I never agreed to do in the first place, right? Because my authenticity is kind of my calling card. It's kind of just who I am. It kind of reminds me of that Golden Girls reference from Sophia where she says, I'm trying to get in good with St. Peter. I'm not trying to take his job. So I'm one of those people. So in the moment, what I realized, I was actually responding to this idea that I had somehow signed up for something that I can't sustain. And in the moment, what I realized is that looking back at my life, the trajectory of everything that I've overcome was based on a series of really fucked up mistakes that I have made throughout my life, but that have led me to a really stable place where even in that moment, though it looked like I was going to get triggered, I was able to be very present. And it brought me to the greater lesson, which was when you have a leadership role or when you're somehow in the public eye, whether you're a content creator on LinkedIn or whether you're on YouTube or whether you're just a person or an actor or whoever you are or a musician, whatnot, you have a public facing thing that there comes a point that as you're going into that path, into that line of sight, so to speak, that you have to ground your energies into who it is that you are feeling like you're going to need to be in that scenario. And so in the moment, though it was kind of something trivial and kind of not even all that important, I realized a greater issue, which was if you don't lead by example and if you hide behind masquerades of perfectionism, then other people really can't follow you or understand you, or they feel like there's something that's phony or fake about you. But there is some cadence to what Michelle Obama had said about making sure that you watch your words and you understand settings and you understand what you're actually signing up for. So what started off as something that wasn't even an issue branched out to a much wider concept that then branched out to something even bigger, which is one of the great things about mistakes in general, is that if you're conscious enough to be present for the moment, you realize that a mistake is literally just your subconscious way of breaking through to your conscious mind, alerting you that something's not in alignment and that mistake needs to be looked at. But as spiritualists, or as you as the audience here, you've come to understand that it's in why you made the mistake to begin with where the lesson can be converted to a blessing, right? Instead of trying to be perfect, you just learn to avoid certain pitfalls by considering a wider array of scenarios or potentialities that can maybe affect you down the road. And so one of the benefits to that kind of methodology is that you start to really find yourself interesting in the way that you operate, because you sense other people's attributes that are similar. It's like finding your family. Right? People who struggle in a certain pathway that come together can reinforce each other, right? And so you become more conscious of how you affect others and what your mistakes are saying about your misalignment. And instead of being triggered, which was what this person was trying to do in the original story, was trying to trigger me because they just don't like me. I realized that in my trying to conform to their idealism, which I had never signed up for, I was dimming myself. I was dimming my light. And it was in danger of triggering me and making me feel awkward or like I had done something that was like in misalignment with the reflection of the greater power. You know what I mean? Like it was a moment there where well, excuse me. And instead of getting mad, I instead looked at the intent behind the person, the setting that I was in, and I looked at it from a much wider perspective of what the lesson is that I was needing to notice in that very moment. So when that happened, I immediately was able to ground my energy into a sense of understanding, which was, as a content creator, as a conscious leader, or as a business owner, whoever you are, you do have a public-facing venue, but it is up to you to decide what that is going to be, and you must decide very, very honestly. And you must be very clear with what it is that you intend to be in the world, right? What part are you being cast in what you're pursuing in your dreams or motivations? And so in that context, what I started to look at was what I had never really agreed to do. Because suddenly I thought about it in a clear voice. I call it my higher mind. Literally said, who asked you to be perfect? I chose you as my avatar because you are so authentic and you're honest and you kind of just are exactly who you are, and it's very helpful to other people to see that. Nothing glamorous about you, nothing particularly outstanding, other than the fact that you have a really big heart and you lead by being so honest with the world. And so I felt very relieved in that epiphany, but then it made me start to question, well, what was the ideal that I was striving for? What perfectionism had I been indoctrinated to pursue? And what it basically boiled down to is, like many of you, when you are a spiritual being, you kind of are conditioned to believe that you are in a very rigid box where you can't do certain things, like you can't have a cocktail or whatever it is that you might do in your life. But you realize that it's a box that can't sustain a person who's authentic, right? You can't be an honest person and arrive to your destination if it's built on lies, hypocrisy, or like what do you call it? Compacting everything so that you don't look at the shadow, right? You can't really do that if you're going to be an effective and authentic person to other people that may be interested in either working with you or whatnot, right? It shuts a lot more doors than you would imagine, because people feel the inauthenticity about you, and more to the point, they question why you're afraid. Because there's nothing worse than someone who puts a lot of effort into what the world sees in them, as opposed to what they're actually made of, and they don't spend a lot of time in working on themselves, because then other people that may seek you for whatever reason are going to find that as a disingenuine kind of quality, and so it just creates a lot more problems than what you need. So when I was looking at the entirety of the thing, what I found is that the truth is that sometimes people will prey on your past mistakes as a means to gain one up on you or to try to knock you down. But if you come from a sense of grounded energy, like where I was working from, then it doesn't work. Because if you are honest and authentic with who you are and you're not striving for perfectionism, it's your imperfections that glimmer and shine the most to other people. And it's part of that light quality that people always see, that it factor. Because there's nothing lying, there's nothing hypocritical in you. It's just who you are. So in the moments that you have like that as a leader or as whoever you are, understand that it's in the intention of the other person that you then have to look at what is the bigger question or the bigger lesson that lays in wait for you once you get past the trigger. That's why we always say be present in the moment. Don't let people trigger you. Instead, look for what the gleaming diamond is that you are being exposed to. And so what it did for me is it made me not only analyze what it was that I was signing up for in my own life and what is my pursuit and dream and how that's going to affect my anonymity and all of that stuff. It actually gave me a wider question on the nature of beings in general. And what it basically boiled down to is that we as peers, especially as leaders and so forth, that read my content or that look at these videos and that are kind of in a similar collective consciousness, if you will, understand that many people make mistakes on their path to success. And one of the things that we can do to each other for each other is to be compassionate and understand that people's trip-ups are a personal part of their journey. But if you can help them understand that everyone makes mistakes, then the world feels a little bit more healed. And you start to really convey something of truth that comes through anybody, right? And so what I basically looked at is I started to then look at different scenarios in which I've seen really good people trip themselves up in the pursuit of perfectionism to the point where other people prey on a basic mistake in a way to disempower them. Meaning that the person doesn't do anything really that bad, but because they're trying to live up to an ideal that they never even agreed to begin with, they then kind of wilt like a flower, or they kind of diminish their light, or they feel bad for something that they don't need to necessarily feel bad about. And you realize that people use that as ammunition. And one of the things about being a strong leader is you can help other people understand that it is your mistakes that lead to your victories. So don't ever let anybody prey upon your lesson plan in a way that makes you feel disempowered. In fact, go the complete opposite way. The fact that they're even interested in aiming shots at you should be a good indication that you're probably on a right path, right? And now the question is, can you be aware enough in order to use the mistakes as propulsion in order to move you forward, or will you wilt and fall because other people are staring at you? Remember, we're told, don't worry about the opinions of others. Instead, worry about the opinion of yourself and arrive every day authentically and arrive every day with integrity and compassion and empathy for everyone. Because everyone is here learning, right? And the point of the whole piece was, again, you don't want to get to the end of your life and literally look back and go, I hadn't really learned anything because I was too afraid of what other people might think of me. So, but in that, what I realized is that I started to look at pop culture in a different way from that single incident, right? It was an inciting incident, if you will. And I started to look at different things that I've noticed within the public domain that maybe we as a collective may want to readjust or look at in a different lens because of how toxic it may actually be towards us as a species, right? Cancel culture. because of the fact that just because someone doesn't agree with you doesn't mean that you immediately get another group of people to then reverse bully the person into subservience, because then nothing ever changes, and actually it embeds itself more deeply into the person that can then act out, in my opinion, in ways that are harmful actually to society. So in the moment, what I started to look at was what I call bank shots. And this is a very interesting conversation and where I might trigger a couple of you. So forgive me if I do, but this is just a hypothetical situation or something that I noticed in pop culture references that I can use now to illustrate the importance of owning your mistakes in the moment so as to not allow other people to then, use it against you when you do these things. Because again, you're here to learn. You should be more concerned about what it is that the mistake is telling you about your current situation. But having said that, we're going to use pop culture because people love pop culture. So one of the things that I noticed is when people live in their true authenticity and they are somehow in the public eye, one of the things that can happen is the devil, if you will, or in this case, other people that mean you ill will, cannot approach you directly, right? Because there's nothing worse than coming at somebody who's never lied about who they are, and then the person trying to use something inflammatory against them, and the people around them going, they never lied about that. I don't know why are you worried about what, you know what I mean? Like they can't do it. So for those of you who are especially spiritual beings, or those of you who are conscious leaders that are moving the species forward for this next phase, be advised that there's something called a bank shot, which is because you can't be directly approached, because you do tend to live in your own integrity and you do live by your own morals and your own ethics, that people can't come at you directly without the collective looking at you wrong, or without you just falling flat on your face because of how strong the personality is before them. So I'm going to use as an example of something that I noticed in pop culture, celebritydom. I hope they don't mind me using them as examples, but I just want you to understand why toxic cancel culture is such an issue right now, and how it preys upon people's mistakes in order to silence and censor other people, and the dangers that come with that. And also how easy it is to manipulate people into grouping that way in order to do the dirty work that the person who's actually puppeteering everything is not even in sight. So that's all the ground. So I remember a situation where Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis were involved in a huge scandal that dropped them down to more than a couple pegs, and really was really controversial. But one of the unfortunate things that happened in that situation was that it was a bank shot, meaning that they couldn't directly go after Ashton or Mila because they weren't really doing anything that was unethical or standing out in the wrong way. They were actually upstanding people. They went after them through their friends, right? And I call that a bank shot, where if you can't get to someone who's actually doing something on behalf of humanity, you go and look at the dirty for anybody around them. And what I mean by this is, remember that I'm not defending the situation, I'm using it as a hypothetical situation, as a hypothetical thing. But the first thing to remember is who Ashton Kutcher is in order to really get the ball moving, right? Okay. So Ashton Kutcher started a charity that dealt specifically with ending child trafficking. And once he and Mila got married together, you guys remember that she also became a co-chair, if you will, of that organization. And their mission was to end child trafficking and child blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that he did is that he went before Congress, right? And he spoke very passionately about the issue in order to really put a light on it, really serving humanity in a big way. And some of the people that may have been in the audience may also happen to coincidentally be on another list that they're not releasing fully. And so he, in my opinion, became a target because he was living on a mission. He was living within purpose. Now, I'm not saying this isn't necessarily true, but I'm telling you what a bank shot is and how strategy works. So, and this is all from mistakes, right? So what ended up happening is that one of the people in their social circle turned out to be like repugnant, right? And is now incarcerated, if I'm not mistaken, and was actually found guilty. But because they couldn't go at them directly, what they did, in my opinion, is they went and actually assassinated their character through someone else. So what ended up happening is that this person did some unspeakable things, and because of their affiliation and friendship, they believed this person to be telling them the truth and did a character declaration, which is anyone can be called to do it, which is basically you just basically say, hey, this is what I know of the person on a personal level, I have never been experienced. I have never seen this other part, but all I can speak to is this. And then you say it. You don't take affiliation and you don't take a stance either way. You're just basically saying who the person is to you and what your personal experience is. It's an attestation. But what ended up happening is that the same people who may be the targets of this particular charity organization, who already don't like this man or Mila for being such strong opponents to this, may have been on the same list that is now all over the headlines, and they needed something to do it. So they used this particular person to go at them indirectly, and it worked because the puppeteers may have then used cancel culture to then go after them, because you have to remember what happened next. So cancel culture then goes after them and says, you blah, 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 and I mean like furious. I get why they were angry, don't get me wrong, I'm not defending them, because there were horrible things that this particular person did. But again, the two people that we're talking about did nothing directly involved anywhere in this scenario. But anyway, cancel culture then is sent after them. And they immediately have Ashton basically step down as the head of his own charity that was fighting the same people who may be puppeteering cancel culture to go after him to begin with. And I was like, oh, that's dirty. But that's strategy, I get it. But notice how all of this train of thought came from the fact that we were talking about mistakes and the pursuit of perfectionism. Because you have no place when you stand on a pedestal or when people put you on a white horse. You have no place to go but usually down, because it's really hard to sustain that. And in this situation, notice that the people involved that we're using as the example, just as a grown-up conversation, never actually did any of the crimes that were the heinous part. They were just affiliated with them. People just assassinated them because of the fact that they were affiliated. And you know what? I'm not justifying it because I don't know Ashton, I don't know Mila. I'm just using a pop culture reference. But notice what a bank shot is, right? So it's a perfect example of when someone makes a mistake and people use it against them in order to enact a greater purpose, a greater issue. Because what if down the road, this particular charity organization was the ones who finally forced the government to release all of the information of the people who were actually accused of wrongful doings, right? Because one of the things we're noticing with that whole case, with the whole island people, is that they're releasing every one of the superfluous information in order to cloud everyone's opinion, in order to kind of then send cancel culture after people who maybe have just passed this person, the Epstein guy. They could have just passed him in a meeting or something, or been invited to a party. You know what I mean? Like, but they saturated the market with a bunch of people who are not accused of wrongful doing, at least from what we can tell, in order to distract people from looking at, well, who's actually the wrongful, who are the people who are being accused of wrongful doings, right? And so it's a really effective way to be strategic as long as people are in slumber. As long as people aren't paying attention to what strategy is, and as long as they can go after people for things like this. And that's why I always say to you, be careful who you partner with and who's in your inner circle, because you never know whether, one, they directly mean you well, because some of them are snakes and you know they're in the grass and they're there for a reason and they're there to Judas you. And then there are other people who they're hiding behind you. Meaning, like, if you are a person of integrity or a person of power, true power, spiritual power, or a business leader, an owner, or an actor, or entrepreneur, whatever your big mogul, light that shines upon you, whatever that is attracts sometimes very dark people, right? And they hide under your light, thinking that because you're there, they will be able to hide in the shadows and nobody will look directly at them. And then sometimes because of the markets or whatever industry you're in, you cross paths with people who really, really are apparently horrendous in their personal life. But remember, that's not who you know. They would never show you that because they know that then you would disappear. So there's a bunch of manipulation that happens in this scenario. But when you walk in divine alignment, or if you're on a divine purpose, you have an extra level of care that must be taken in order to truly effectively lead your cause or to do what you need to do. Unless you've learned to do what I call a long-term review of what path you're on and where it's taking you, and can you sustain it in a way where you're authentic and always honest, which is why you guys know I'm completely transparent. You guys, some of you have read the 3 books, some of you have read all of my stuff. I don't lie about my past, I don't lie about anything I'm going through now, and I just do that because then no one has any power over me. Anything that someone releases, all of you will be like, yeah, we know, he already wrote it in the book like 3 years ago. Like, we know all of it. I'm not justifying any of it by any means, but what I'm saying is that I don't allow my mistakes to be used as a weapon against me because there's nothing for them to hold on to. But in a situation like that, what I did realize because of all of this was the train of thought eventually led to the fact that we have to be cautious and conscious of who we're around because of such bank shop mentality, right? People who are on that list, or people who live in really degradation or sin or whatever you want to call it, have a way of not being able to stand directly before someone of light, right? It's really hard for them to do it because the person of light will immediately see all of the things that they've overcome in the person and will basically read them really quickly. And so they don't come directly because you also never know just how spiritually gifted the person is standing before you or how gifted they are in their profession. And so I remember listening to Elon Musk talk about when he interviews people and he's looking for if they can prove the trajectory, like he looks for BS in people's conversation. And I find that that's probably really intimidating for anybody going towards him if they're not in their authenticity. But he's another perfect example. Now remember, Musk, who I hope he doesn't mind me using this, I don't know him, but I hope you don't mind me using you if you ever see this. He also has a bit of a private life, and his private life has made the news a couple of times for some of the people he's been affiliated with. And so that's one of the things that we as people need to start becoming conscious about, is when other people start using other people's dirty laundry to avoid us from seeing the truth of them, right? Because Musk, say what you will about him, is a really good, authentic person, and basically what you see is what you get. That's the man, He's on the, I think he has Asperger's, but the thing is that he's a very, very gifted intellectual, and he's very, very progressive and stunning, but he has some idiosyncrasies and some personality traits that other people try to attack him on, which isn't necessarily fair, but I get it. If you're going to be an industry leader, you have a certain set of standards. But that's my point. Maybe it's time for us to redefine what those standards are because it's making it impossible to stay in certain positions and still have a personal growth development plan, right? We have to be compassionate to other people. Now, there's certain things that we can't be. Like, I'm not saying anything criminal. I'm not saying anything that's hurtful to children or to women or nothing like that. But I'm talking about just small imperfections of impropriety with people they date or whatnot. Like, what business is it of ours? And what does that say about our culture that we would rather buy the dirty on people than to praise people for the good work that they do, right? And that's one of the dangers with cancel culture in general, in part 2 of the message, which is where I said I was going to trigger even more you, which is the fact that I get that we have emotions, right? Emotions are an incredibly important part of development for all human beings. But one of the things that we're missing in our emotional response to every little thing is we don't always wait for the entirety of a picture. And we may jump to do something that in the long term actually disempowers something even bigger that was even more important down the road. Again, Ashton being asked to step down when he was such a visceral, beaming example of opposition to what turned out to be a lot of very powerful people being involved in something really gross that we as a collective are just beginning to glean. And so it was kind of an effective way to make him step down from something that he was so passionate about, that they were passionate about, in a way that made them look almost disgraceful. And by using cancel culture, it almost helped propel it. It was like puppeteering a bunch of people, and I know that hurts people's feelings when I say that, but it's grown-up talk, right? When you're puppeteered into a quick knee-jerk reaction to do something to someone, and then later you turn and you look at it and you go, crap, I was duped, right? I get where everybody's coming from, because the things that this man, the other guy did that's now in jail, are horrendous and absolutely not acceptable by any means. But you see what I'm saying is that it was very easy because of their affiliation to put them together and disempower someone who was actually doing humanitarian work for the globe, right? Like child trafficking is not just, it's not just an American thing. It's all over the planet. And there are horrific things that are happening to children domestically and internationally. And this charity was fighting it. And then the person who was created was forced to step down, not because of his own direct actions, but because of who he was associated with and something that he did by mistake. Okay, fine. But the thing with cancel culture that's dangerous, in my humble opinion, is that if you can't win on a debate, if you can't win by arguing something back and forth, and you have to resort to bullying and to making someone conform to your will, then you are effectively censoring not just them, but yourself. It's a mirror, right? If you take someone else's freedom away from speaking or making mistakes, then you yourself have no mistake possibility. You squash your light immediately. And that's really super dangerous, especially at a time when so many people are involved in what I call the power grab, right? Like there's so much imploding and so many things where hypocrisy really does need to be looked at, but then there are people who are the actual hypocrites who are puppeteering people in order to take down kind of the lesser versions. Like it's a whole strategy thing. And it's a wonderful opportunity for those of you who are leaders and business tycoons and analysts to really look at the world from a different lens, right? Because when you understand the strategy that some people have in order to block themselves from being seen, then you can much more clearly see the people that are actually doing the work, and you can understand what it is that their motivations are. But the thing is that in the end, what I wanted to really be clear on is that when you strive for perfectionism, when you are somehow dishonest about who you are in your personal life, and there's a big discrepancy and a dissonance between the two, understand that people can use that as firewood to come after you. And one of the things that we need to be conscious of as people and as peers, especially as a family on a planet together that are all evolving and growing, is every mistake that we make can somehow benefit another person in either avoiding the same pitfall or the same mistake, or can educate us on a better way of operations, right? So someone's trip up today can serve as a bridge for someone else to walk right over it, where they won't do it, which basically means that the person who made the mistake is living their purpose. They did something that actually affects a grander group of people, and it's in their love and light and their mistake that we as a collective were able to witness it in order to then find a better path. And so if we continue down this path of canceling each other out because we disagree with each other, then there's no point to the academy. And I want you guys to really ingest what I mean by that. If everyone cancels everyone else out because you can't agree on something, which of course they prey upon, if you can't do that, then understand that then there's going to come a point where something up there is going to go, well, then what's the point of you all being here? If you can't learn, if you can't grow, if you can't prosper, and you only serve to go downwards and to implode and to possibly then want to go into the universe carrying that cancerous type of toxicity, then why would we have you here? What's the point of the simulation? If there's no growth, there's no purpose. And it's something that we as adults in general, whether you're spiritual or not spiritual, even if you're an atheist, you can understand that principle. If you're killing the entire planet and your mistakes are so grotesque that you don't care, and you're so worried about materialism and all of those things, that you're basically censoring everybody into a form of submission where nobody has any freedoms at all, then what would be the point of the academy existing, period? And that's like a really big adult question that comes out of this. But notice that it is when you're striving for perfection that people can sometimes trap you the most, because if you get someone stuck in their head, especially a really influential person, if you get them stuck in their head with other people's bias or their opinions about and like pitting people against each other that should be working together down the road, then you're an effective opponent. And you need to sometimes look at the world that way, because they always say life is a game. And I don't always agree with that, because I don't really like people being so dirty and so dark. And like, I'm a man's man, which is funny because I'm a gay guy, but I'm a man's man. Like, if I have an issue with you, it's going to be right face to face. I don't do bank shots. I don't try to take people out by hiding in the shadows just because I know that they probably know all my sin. Like, I literally would never do that. But that doesn't mean other people won't. And so it's twofold. Do we continue down the path where we try to make people into perfectionists, where they can't breathe and they can't grow, in order to subdue them, in order to be controllable? Or do we allow people the ability to rise like we did and help them understand that it is their mistakes to propel them into victory tomorrow? right? Those are the big ethical questions that we as conscious leaders are now facing. It's not just about, okay, it's good to make mistakes. It's about what is the message we're sending to our children, and what are we sending, what's the message we're sending to each other. Because one of the things I noticed is that in my moment where I was processing all this information, I really could feel myself thinking so analytically in my own head that I had to get out of it because I wasn't my normal person. Meaning, I have this way of walking into a room and it lights up apparently, and I didn't really know that until this was happening, and I think the next day I went to work. And as soon as I walked in, everybody looked at me and goes, "What's wrong?" And I literally was just in thought. There was nothing wrong. I was in a good mood. Everything was great. But my energy had shifted. It was different. And people were responding to it. And what I realized is that when you are just who you are, you carry a lot of energy that doesn't necessarily make sense in the physical world, right? And it's nothing you're doing personally. It just has to do with who you are and kind of where you're on the mountain, right? A person who lives in a very happy state, like I do, even if it's naive and people like mistaken me for being like, I don't know, too naive until they actually meet me and then they realize that I'm the wrong person to piss off sometimes. But it's not disingenuous to who I am. I never lie about that, right? I always say, just because I choose to be happy every day and I choose to be humble and I choose to be a good example of divine light and these are all choices I make every second of every day. That doesn't mean that I don't know how to go from the kitten to the fucking lion. Like, I'm a Leo rising. It's part of who I am. But I don't lead with that. And that's super important for us as a collective to really understand. So understand that some of you are kind of coming to a position where you're going to have to be very clear about what it is that you agree to in the future. Do you agree to try to make everybody as perfect as you are? Or do you really want to finally look at the fact that if it wasn't for your shadow, you wouldn't really have life, you would be bored? Sometimes the biggest mistakes I've made make me laugh the hardest because I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? And when I started to get my light back, when I kind of came back to my normal self and I was like, I dropped the heaviness of the conversation. I remember getting into an Uber on my way because it was raining here in LA. And the lady and I were laughing and cutting up, and it was a normal day-to-day. I had come back to myself. But what it was is I realized that I had released the tension of trying to be someone else's idea. Right? I'm my own master of creation, right? I believe I work for a much higher power, and I'm here to be very loving. I'm love and light, blah, 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 blah. But these are choices that we make. And a lot of them are based on the fact that at some point you realize that if you find yourself amusing enough to really kind of look at some of the mistakes you made and laugh about it, it empowers you to then look at the mistakes you're making now in a new way. And it actually makes you feel much stronger because you're like, oh, I get why I did that. I had a bigger moral issue with the hypocrisy on this. Or I had a bigger issue with this. And instead of justifying the reasons why you do something, you own it and you go, oh, I get it. And in that ownership, you just get stronger and stronger and stronger as a being. And that's one of the benefits to this particular piece and why I felt so adamant about wanting to come on here and actually do a video that kind of walked us through the thought process and kind of what it is to understand this particular piece and all of the subtext that came in. Because one of the things that you'll find as I conclude this is you're going to find yourself in a really good position somewhere down the road where you realize that even if you're spiritual, the idea of the perfected ones is based on people who have gone through the trial and error run, meaning that they have made all the mistakes that they needed to make to a point where they just stop making them, not because they're striving for it, but because they've been educated. And so if you are in the most prestigious academy in the entire universe, like we believe we are, and you are gifted with the opportunity to trial and error your way through a maze, which will someday lead you to what they believe to be a perfected one, meaning that you won't make those mistakes anymore and you can embody the divine vessel of whatever your purpose is meant to be, then understand that you made it because of everything that you fucked up. It's your mess ups. It's what dulls the sword, if you will, right? To a point where it doesn't hurt you if you make a mistake. Instead you go, oh, I get why I did that. Oh, okay, I understand what the direction is. Oh, I get the correlation between this and that. And you suddenly find yourself much more interesting and you find your worth. And that's important. Some of us are embedded in coal right now, meaning that there's so much that we have to work through in shadow and in our psyche and how we view the world and why we're depressed and all this other stuff. But it's really hard to then go beyond that to why those things are surfacing, because we're so busy looking at the face value of it, right? Yeah, we're depressed. But a lot of people are depressed. I mean, look at what's going on in the world. But then you have to look at the context of how much the media plays a part in what they bombard us with, right? When's the last time we really saw really uplifting stories that were longer than 5 seconds, right? They don't really do that because they make more money on misery, and they make more money on making people feel bad for who they are as opposed to uplifting humanity. And so the only way for us to really uplift us is to kind of start waking up. I know people get triggered by the woke term, which I also don't like the word woke, but waking up, meaning to be conscious and self-aware enough to constantly be aware of the landscape in order to understand people's motivations and what the business industry or what the purpose is for why we're so bombarded, right? So, but understand that it is in your trajectory of the mistakes you've made that make you more aware, because you are working on yourself. And in that, you start to relate with other people and you start harmonizing chaos. Excuse me. And harmonizing chaos is a really powerful, beautiful thing. It's like an orchestra leader finally getting all of the instruments to be perfectly in alignment. It takes a lot of effort. But one of the things that happens with the directory, it's in looking at the detail of what the issue is that we're facing and really breaking it down into an honest way where you own the mistake. Because the more you own your mistakes and the more you stand, not in pride, because that's bad. If you're very narcissistic and proud of everything, then that's probably not a good thing. But what I'm saying is that when you stand in an authentic place where you understand yourself deeply enough to kind of find some of the things funny and to be really aware of the importance of other little trivial things, then you become a much better guide and brother and sister for humanity, right? Because there's nothing that can trap you. It's the complete opposite. It frees you. And if you free yourself, the more and more you work at it, the more other people are freed to also relax a little bit and kind of drop the rigidity that comes with this ideal of being a perfected one, right? Because again, why be in the most prestigious academy in the entire universe if you're not going to learn from your mistakes? And the only way to do that is to not try to strive for perfectionism. To be a perfected one means that you have made all the mistakes you can possibly make over the course of I don't know how many lifetimes, depending on what you believe, over that many lifetimes, to the point where it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've done the work. And when you've done the work, you get the reward. But it's not something you strive for directly. It's something that happens over the course of time. So stop trying to jip the process and jump ahead, because when you take angles, you lose. Because you miss things. And those little things are things that will trip you up down the road. And until you're founded on full foundation, I'm talking about stone, then you're going to be susceptible to other people coming at you for the mistakes you've made, as opposed to being like, yep, I did it. What do you got? What do you got? Let's talk about it. Because a person who's able to do that is not going to go after the dirt of the other person, but instead is going to showcase what their actual intention was through the conversation. And that's one of the things that cancel culture blocks us from, is people hide behind cancel culture in order to then not have to have the conversations, right? A stalemate, if you will. And we see it all the time in politics. They love to do it. In fact, that's the only thing they seem to, no offense, but seem to know how to do well, is to take breaks and like, oh, we can't figure this out, so let's just shut down for the next 3 days. The world can't do that. And the more that we as conscious leaders and as beings speak to that and kind of digest the information in new and progressive ways, the more that we're going to have tension. But understand that it's in those tension moments that break us through to a new world, to a new ideal, right? We have a whole subsection of generations that have absolutely no interest in buying into the old world that has basically ended, right? And they're so focused on the future that they're not looking at, you know what I mean? And so we're going to have to bridge this together. And I'm telling you that one of the things that we need to bridge is understand that they are coming at us with a much more relaxed approach to life, because they have not been indoctrinated to the level that some of us, like Generation X and above, has. But then we also have to understand that there needs to be structure and order, and that we as Generation X and the baby boomers can then be like, well, at least let us tell you why we did it. But if you're in cancel culture, and if you're not allowed to say anything, and if you're heavily censored, then there's no communication and no one grows. No one is free to make any mistakes, and that would be a horrific hell of an experience for all of us. So understand that just because you make mistakes, own those things in order to be empowered before, so you can stand before the world, especially if you are a content generator or somehow going to be a vessel of light for the world, or if you're going to do something that's pretty badass. You need to be there you. You need to get there owning all of it and being like, yep, I did it. Don't know what I was thinking at the time, but I'll tell you what I think about it now. And then that engages the other person, and the other person's like, I can't believe you did that. Well, and then naturally, during the course of conversations with the right aligned people, those of you who understand where I'm coming from and what I'm saying to this, what you'll understand is that you will have much more compassion for each other, and you will open doors that no one ever thought could be open, right? You can break peace into chaotic situations because you finally address the pain, because you understand your own pain. That's what mistakes are sometimes are, is pain. It's pain manifested in a subconscious way. And what you'll find over the course of life, especially if you're a spiritual person, is that there will come a point where, like, you begin to serve your soul and then eventually fully serve the soul, almost acting like a unicorn or a horse, if you will, where the soul sits upon it and kind of guides your avatar. I call it avatar because we have a lot of scientific people here, but for those of you of faith, you know what I'm talking about. So, but when you serve that, eventually down the road, if you're in full alignment, your subconsciousness then does the same thing that you were doing for your soul. Your subconsciousness then begins to serve your conscious state of awareness in a way where both of them are working in tandem in order to take the best course of action or to find ways to do things in a better way. But notice how it's called alignment, right? So you begin to serve your soul, and your soul basically is guiding you to avoid certain mistakes, but allows you the ability to make them in order to learn, and the soul learns from that interaction. Then your unconscious mind makes you sometimes do some really weird stuff that if you're not fully aware and conscious of, that it can trip you up and kind of fuck up society. But if you're in alignment, your unconscious mind starts to indicate flare-ups that are coming that you may not see necessarily, but that it knows intuitively, and it'll pop it up either ahead of time or right before it can be catastrophic. And it's up to us as beings to then be conscious and be there and be present to catch it before it happens or becomes an issue. And that's basically what I want to end on. In the end, guys, what I really wanted to just do with this is empower you to understand that your mistakes are your greatest blessings. If they're caught, right? If you look at it and you analyze it and you work with it. The world is not as dark as they want us to believe it is. And you have to know that because of your own interactions. I literally walk around life sometimes and I go, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I've rarely met beasts of people, like, I get the media is telling us things that are actually happening, but we have so much information available to us that we're becoming saturated with information that is not applicable to our experiences, and it brings us down. It causes like mental strife and like stuff like that, because you start to believe the hype. You start to believe that the simulation is dark and that it's all going to hell, which is convenient for the people who are doing wrongdoing, because then people don't really look at them. But when you live in kind of a more virtuous stance and you're kind of like live and let live like me, because I'm the least pious person on planet Earth. I don't judge other people, but that's something that I've been directly in my own personal life have been told for my higher self, is like, don't judge other people because you don't know what journey they're on, and you don't know what the train of thought is, because in the end you are a train of thought. And one of the great things about being a train of thought as a living vessel is that the trip-ups that you make you stronger, and that actually resolve queries that something or someone or whatever you want to believe. Whether you believe it's God, whether you believe it's the great architect, whether you believe it's the simulation, whether you believe it's the matrix, whatever you call it. It is working through you and while you're here, and it's a very beautiful symbiotic relationship between the student and the classroom. And the classroom is interacting with us. And one of the great things about that is it allows us to learn. It just hopes that we always choose the path that doesn't put us in physical danger. And the only way to really understand stuff like that is to be so aware of how blessed you are to be here that you start to find yourself interesting enough to then find the pain and find the problems and work them out and understand why you do things in a grander scheme in order to then help other people figure out why they do certain things, right? Because there's no two people that are going to have the identical path, but that's kind of the point. When you have cross sections, then that's where you have good conversations, or those cross sections. And that's basically what I want to say to you guys. So don't strive for perfection. Instead, why don't you just strive to be the best person, the best version of you can be, and understand that it's the funniest things that you will look back on that have given you the best momentum forward have been the trip-ups and hiccups. And the things that you probably should have done, you shouldn't have done, are sometimes the things that make you then able to avoid those things in a more public-facing persona. And then also understand what motivation is, and understand that when you understand human condition through yourself and then kind of look at it through other people, you start to become more aware of bank shots. You start to become more aware of needing to be compassionate towards others and kind of get the full explanation for why they did it from the horse's mouth in order to fully understand it before you judge them. Because as you've seen, sometimes people use other people to shut people down that may be a greater threat in another arena to the people that are puppeteering things. And all that takes is just to be aware that people make mistakes. Some mistakes I'm not excusing. There are certain things. Anything having to do with children, I absolutely have zero tolerance for, period. Anything having to do with like beating women, all of there are things that I do not that I absolutely would never, defend or anything like that. But what I'm saying though is that there are things that we need to be more compassionate with. And one of the best ways to do that is to be compassionate with yourself and understand that you are the creator of your own dream. But make sure you know what you're signing up for, and make sure that you show up as you're meant to. The true you, not the one that other people tell you you need to be. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Bye, guys.